So what I'm doing here is presenting some research by other people, by Danielle Logue and Matthew Grimes, whose research is inspiring me. And what I want to try to do in this session is completely plagiarized, right? I'm just presenting their research. There's a model that I think is really useful, and I think it doesn't quite work in an analyst relations setting. I think it's super intriguing, and it's really taken off in academic settings. So what I'm going to do is see if I can go into a full screen view here.
I think you're in it, aren't you?
No, look, you can see the address bar and everything. So if I bigify this, yeah, that is bigified, isn't it? Excellent, right.
Totally different game.
Totally different, game changer. And I'm going to move the microphone over here, slightly closer to me, so that people can hear me. This is the paper. It's in the Academy of Management Journal, which is like a very good journal. You know, most people who ask to have their research published by the Academy get a no, and so it's very good that Danielle and Matthew did. And I mean, I'd like to thank them both for responding to me very kindly when I wrote a summary of this paper a couple of months ago, but also just for doing this research. And I want to start off just by talking about how important this notion of hype is broadly for people like us who are looking at new markets. Tech is a weird space because even though we think of IBM and Oracle and AWS, and I mean these are massive firms, right? They're absolutely not startups, and yet they are relentlessly throwing themselves into nascent markets. So even though they're not startups, you could say that a company like somebody I used to know at Microsoft said back in the days when there were around 60,000 people at Microsoft said, Microsoft looks like it's an organization with 60,000 people, but actually it's 6,000 teams of 10. And there's a certain sense in which even in the largest firms, you've got very similar dynamics to startups and scale-ups that are unfolding in large tech firms, in small tech firms, and in tiny ones. And the notion of hype is really intriguing because of the way that in daily conversation amongst the person on the bus and in a high-tech setting, hype is used in rather similar ways and rather different ways. So with the interviews that Neil and I were talking about, where we've been speaking to some of the analysts who were involved in creating the hype cycle and the way that hype has been contained and weaponized, that's a loaded phrase, the way that it's been contained and used as a resource, there is this same tension in the way that the analysts talk about it from the way that the general public might talk about hype. Yeah, so there's a sense of which hype is a resource, right? It's like a tool that is available. You employ it. If you want your system to get noticed, you've got to hype it up a little bit, right? You've just got to do that a little bit. And this is something which is very culturally specific. You think of the way that, in the English-speaking countries, we have this phrase of "fake it till you make it," right? And I think this is very kind of modish, whereas maybe in Austria, say, faking it till you make it seems like a very bad idea and something that you should absolutely not do, and something that is pretty disreputable, But there is that idea of hype being a resource, right? It's a behavior. We know we have a sense of what that looks like when we are hyping it up. We wake up at 2 o'clock in the morning, we turn on the TV, there's some dull shopping channel. What those people are doing, that's hyping, right? They're hyping it up. We can recognize it when we see it, and to a degree, it's necessary. But then on the other hand, there are liabilities, right? So hype is dangerous, and in some places it is, with capital letters, a bad thing. Yeah? So when we spoke to Jackie Fenn, who co-authored the book on the hype cycle, you definitely see the evolution in her thinking of saying, well, there's hype and there's the hype cycle. I mean, there's hype, and really, when we started looking at hype, a lot of hype was a bad thing, right? Hype was obstructing. It was putting smoke and mirrors. You know, hype is confusing things. But then when we think of it, actually, it's a phenomenon that can be understood. And then if you understand, well, there's going to be a certain amount of, there's going to be a lot of hype because of where that technology is, then that helps you to recalibrate the noise, right? You know, somebody is shouting about there being something happening in the kitchen, but it's my 7-year-old who shouts all the time. Okay, I can recalibrate that. But on the other hand, it's my grandmother shouting about something in the kitchen. Well, I better put down what I'm doing and pay a lot of attention, because I'm just recalibrating that. You know, the idea that hype is used differently at different stages in the maturity of a product's lifestyle means that even though I can think of it as being like maybe a little bit of a dangerous thing, I can limit and constrain and modulate the way that I'm thinking about hype. And so what these colleagues were interested in doing was looking at business people presenting nascent enterprises and just seeing what do business people do, what do spokespeople do when they're doing this hype, and are there some characteristic hypey things that people are doing, right? Ways in which they are framing these resources, ways in which they are working, and you know, spoiler alert, to cut a long story down, yeah, there are, and there are some things that tend to be played around, and what they're doing is dealing with a necessary paradox that the value of the thing being hyped is largely in the future. It's largely in the future. It's unknowable. It's unseeable. It's distant. Yeah. But all you have is what is here now, right? You're just a spokesperson standing in front of a stock exchange, asking it to love you. So you have to use as much proof as you have. And some of the proof that you're using is, you know, tangible, materially tangible, but then some of it is expectations. If you can find proof of expectations, people say that this is going to happen, then suddenly that becomes proof. Yeah? So you think of Rory's time working at IDC. IDC is famous for market forecasts. And people who work at market forecasts don't take their market forecast any more seriously than a weather forecast takes their weather forecasts, or a bookmaker takes his odds. But the vendors who use these market forecasts take them much, much more seriously. They are essential. Any scrap of proof that you can find now reduces the reputational liability, reduces the risk of you. And if your predictions are wrong, you've got some, well, it wasn't my fault, you know. IDC said that these chips would take over the world. It's not my fault that nobody bought them. So you're trying to summon up every shred of evidence that you can find now, and that's the way the analysts have to work. The analysts also have to rely on every shred of information available. But then there's this paradox, because what you're really trying to do is use what exists now to illuminate what does not exist. Yeah. So if you think about it, that's a bit of a logical fallacy, isn't it? What exists now doesn't necessarily prove in any way claims that you were making about what does not exist for the future. So that's the difficulty, because very often companies are also involved in future-oriented work, like we might be doing proofs of concept, You know, there might be lots of things that are happening. Again, I can think from my own experience of where I'm working. You know, we're doing an awful lot of absolutely leading edge stuff for clients that just won't let us talk about it. Yeah, we're doing stuff in Finland where we're using expertise of automating the telecoms network to help also make the power network more resilient. And you know, absolutely amazing stuff, and really difficult to talk about. So when you can't share these proofs of concept, you may not have a lot of hard data, or the hard data that you have, you might not be able to share. That makes it even more challenging to prove this future value. So then that means you need to use the evidence that you have now to try to prove what is happening in the future.
Can I add something to that?
Please add something to that.
So the other challenge that you have along with hype is, and how it relates to reality, is that without that tangible proof and without those use cases and actual case studies, it leaves it open to interpretation. So the vision that you're creating is going to be interpreted and defined differently by different vendors in their implementation of something. And so by the time a customer is actually looking to buy it into your hype, there's confusion because they don't know which story is real and which vision will really get them there. And there's no idea of, you know, vendors are usually 10 steps ahead of any customer. And so when they go to buy, how are they going to see the pathway to actually get to that vision? You know, they see the vision, it's great, but that's not near their reality now, and they're trying to implement and deal with their reality now. So buying this future, how does that help them? How can they even get there when they're struggling in the present?
Yeah, totally.
That is the cool thing about tools like the hype cycle or other equivalent things from Forrester, from IDC. And the cool thing is not so much the hype part of it. The cool thing is the cycle.
Yeah.
Because you can see at what point of the regular cycle a certain topic is perceived at the moment. Is it at the height of exaggerated expectations, or is it in the in the slope of disillusionment, or where is it currently? So the interesting thing is not the hype. The interesting thing is the cycle that every little single one of those dots is going through as it is being hyped.
I agree, and I'll add that the challenge with that is that even if it's in the, you know, back at the top or in the cycle of disillusionment, if somebody still wants that vision to implement, they don't know necessarily how to actually get there, because there's a lot of change management that they have to think about that nobody's actually addressed for them.
Yeah.
You know, they're just here's Nirvana, find the path.
Yeah. Well, and that's again the where I am with a certain topic on the hype cycle informs me of what type of questions I should be asking right now in order to make that topic maybe part of the strategy that I'm executing to support my way forward. So I then know we're now in the slope of disillusionment, so I need to understand, so what are the frustrations and what are the ways out of that? Because I know once we've solved those, it will gradually become a viable thing. So if I can solve those questions, maybe through inquiries with the relevant analysts, I can make this thing fly and make this work and get my business forward through this. Yeah, I think that's the cool thing about it.
Yeah.
That's a question in relation to that. I mean, it strikes me that AR isn't as interested in the hype cycle as it is in, say, for example, the Magic Quadrant. So Magic Quadrant, you'll influence your dot, but surely it must be the same, because you could be influencing your industry. And if your industry is kind of like stagnant, or not going anywhere, you could actually be useful for you to move it. Is that a thing, or?
Yes, totally. So the Magic Quadrant is, or generally these vendor ranking reports are, I believe, massively overstated and misinterpreted too. people think if you're top right in the Magic Quadrant, you have the best product. Because if you look at the questionnaire of a MarketScape or a Wave or a Magic Quadrant, that's 250 something questions that cover both your completeness of vision and your ability to execute throughout your business: marketing, delivery, service, product, development, everything. The 360 degree of your business, not the product, the business in that product niche. So the Magic Quadrant actually does not rate your product, but your business strength, your strength as a company in that market. And your product is one tiny little element of that.
But Chris, it's easy to intervene into the Magic Quadrant because of all of these questions. But how about the hype cycle, right? So how do vendors intervene into the hype cycle?
Well, you get mentioned as an example vendor for a certain technology. And because you don't have an entire write-up about your business or your product, and you're just being mentioned with the single word, I don't know, NVIDIA is an example vendor in that AI stuff. That makes it more or less prone to buyers thinking this might be a pay-to-play thing. It comes across as being more credible sometimes. And it's just that one word being mentioned as a example vendor is powerful enough to get you on the shortlist. You don't need that entire write-up. It's powerful enough to get you an action item on that next inquiry call that your potential buyer is going to schedule with that analyst.
So we use the hype cycle a little differently. We use it as a sales tool as well as a product tool. So for our product team, it's, where are we and how do we fit in this cycle? But in our sales tool, as we're talking to prospective buyers about, you need to innovate, you should be like, we know you want to be ahead of your game. We use the hype cycle to say, look, you can be here and help shape the market. And so we have it as a different purpose to go along with, any other backup cycles or not cycles, quadrants or anything else that say we're the leader. The quadrant gives us the credibility to be having that conversation, and the hype cycle gives us the proof that our vision is going forward and is really forward thinking.
Thank you. In amongst analysts, it's one of the biggest causes of arguments, fallouts, breaking of perfectly good friendships and working relationships, because it is so argued about.
What, hype or what? What is so hype?
The cycles, where is a product or a service or a thing on these cycles, whether it's technology. I think IDC, for example, does a TechScape one, Tech Landscape one.
Tech Landscape.
The multiple curves. It provokes a lot of opinion and a lot of eyes and beard pulling. It kind of goes to the fundamental aspect of where analysts being challenged on where their particular subject matter expertise, their focus, their baby is, and often it's taken very personally. So you can you get situations where things are on the analysts who are looking at that area would have very happy with it, but when it's kind of on the way down and another one's coming up, then it can lead to problems. You get many arguments and disagreements.
And maybe this says something about are analysts predisposed to accept hype? Because if we think of the components of hype, showing that the evidence is here. If you look at the chicken entrails, you try to decipher what's inside the crystal ball. To firstly say, like, the existing evidence is here for growth, but then also the future promise of growth is substantial. If an analyst is responsible for an area that is looking more hyped, then this is good news for their career. You think of the way that Neil has spoken about that. Chris also, it's very good news for an analyst if they're in an area. So the analyst may be predisposed for confirming data. From the perspective of like a research director, you want to love all your children directly. The person who's looking after printers, they're bringing home solid bank, right? The person who's doing AI enabled something for which there's no market yet, they're basically a loss leader, but they're not generating any revenue. You really don't want that person to be overexcited, and you don't want your most effective analysts to walk towards the hype all the time. Somebody has to make dinner, right? Not everybody can talk about whether there's life on Mars.
I think the more experienced the analyst, in my experience, the more experienced an analyst, they are much more likely to shy away from anything that smells of hype, because they understand what the long-term implications are. I've witnessed plenty of new analysts or maybe younger analysts who will see a career opportunity in something like, crypto, Bitcoin. I saw quite a bit of that. And created a practice, and then the whole, the crypto bros moved on to something else. The market kind of, and then all of the scandals happened, and they kind of felt very much sort of left out on their own. But at the same time, some of the more experienced AI analysts have really sounded the alarm bells at anything to do with Gen AI, because they see that as dragging that entire sector cycle, and effectively have kind of repositioned themselves as a result. I think the more experienced analysts look at the long term, and the challenge with the long term is it tends to negate talking about hype now. It becomes a much more structured way of talking about technology. It's in stages. I think a lot of people learned from cloud, the whole cloud evolution and journey back in the day when I worked at IBM, and Sam Palmazada, who was the CEO at the time, gave a TV interview, and he talked about the opportunity for on-demand. Remember on-demand back in the day? And literally after it was, he put the phone down, the phones in our office and this team were ringing off the hook, because everybody within the company said, you have to quantify what the on-demand market is. What the heck is this? It's a concept. It created
how many kilos of on-demand would you like?
Exactly. How many? Exactly. So I think there are many tales of well-intentioned analysts who see an opportunity potentially for a what the new thing is, and follow that, and end up kind of crashing and burning. The analysts who kind of take it as a long-term strategic step-by-step are the ones that are still here, and that's kind of where we are with cloud now. So many of the insights around cloud are, if anybody tells you this is the going to solve all your business problems and you have to move everything to cloud, they're basically lying. They are basically drinking too much of the Kool-Aid. As a more maturing technology, the message now is take it step by step. It depends on the needs of your business. It depends on what stage of the process you are, etc. A much more kind of sensible, business-oriented discussion as opposed to a hype discussion. So I think fundamentally all these things they eventually get to that point. The advice to analysts is be careful what you wish for. If you see a new opportunity, and then go for it.
Let me move on a little bit, because it's very important for me to use this session to elicit your reactions to this notion of hype, and I would also extend this invitation to people who are listening online. So I hope that my colleagues who are watching the meeting Q&A will interrupt if there are any questions that come in the meeting Q&A. But what I want to do is kind of dig into this research a little bit and show like what are the forms of hype that these colleagues are observed. And there are basically three particular behaviors, three kinds of hyping that they saw time and time again when they were looking at these ventures. And they were looking at ventures that had narratives around sustainability. So there's a wide range of GRC sustainability related solutions, and I find this categorization really useful. But I think there are other kinds of hype that might not be mentioned in these three blobs. So I suppose that's what I'm really interested to hear from the people here and the folk online is, are there other kinds of are there other archetypes of hype that people recognize? The first thing that they saw is motivating the future state. Yeah, so to say, look, the world is like this now, and then in the future, you know, it's going to be carbon neutral or carbon negative, right? So what will have to happen for this to occur? And of course, if you say that to an industry analyst, they will say, well, firstly, that desired outcome is not guaranteed. You may not get that. But even if you were to get there, there are several scenarios about how you get there. And unfortunately, some of those scenarios are dead ends, and some of them continue all the way there. So like the analyst immediately starts objecting as soon as you paint a picture of a future state. But it's only by projecting that you start to deal with you want to start to deal with the objective. You know, you want to go on holiday to Venice for 2 weeks next year. There are lots of reasons why somebody might not want to go with you to Venice for 2 weeks, but it's only if you raise the vision that you can start dealing with the objectives. And so motivating this future state is essential in a business setting also, because that is a way of indicating the value that can be created, identifying the value capture, identifying the business model for it. So that without that future state, it's very hard to locate the opportunity. You start to decompose. Well, in order to get from A to B, we need all of these things in between. All of these things need to be unlocked. So you're materializing it by saying this change involves a market. There are solutions involved in making this change. These are the stakeholders who benefit from that. So you're painting a picture of everybody who benefits from this movement, and therefore hoping to minimize, make small, and exclude from the narrative those who lose out from the change. Locating the opportunity often involves concealing incumbent power. Yeah, removing you think of that go-to-market challenge that startups have. Well, the existing go-to-market channels are owned by incumbents that may not benefit from this future state. So the more you mobilize the opportunity, the better. And then the third thing that they see being very powerful is role claiming, saying, well, the thing about us at XYZ Corp is that we've been recognized by Duncan and his dog as being the #1 firm in sustainable tech, and that means that we are going to move forward. Now, anyone who's looked at tech markets knows that the first mover advantage can be extremely fragile, in a whole series of, tech brands get eaten for lunch all the time, right? They're really only good as their sales forces. But claiming this uniqueness is extremely important, because you've got all of these early stage participants, and in reality, these are the difference between early stage participants can be very small. Big gaps between the performance of early stage participants is not really a guide to future performance. But you have to make it sound like that is the case, because if you're one other startup in a super hot area, how can you, just because there's going to be growth in a market, just because there's lots of money to be made, that doesn't mean that I'm going to be successful, right? And in reality, in many markets, you can create a lot of value, but you can completely fail to capture it for yourself. But again, that's something else that gets marginalized from the challenge of value capture is something that very often startups don't talk about, because value capture is a product of power. Really, the more power you have as a supplier, the less power your competitors and substitutes have, the more you're able to value capture. If you look at a whole pile of tech markups of tech markets, the innovators have created massive amounts of value for other people who were better positioned and had more power. So role claiming is the third thing that these colleagues saw. in the markets that they were at. I could go into a little bit more depth about how they collected their data and where they collected their data in London and in Singapore. But I think I'm going to pause just on this slide because I love it so much. And what I'm really interested in is like what's missing? Like what kinds of hype do you see that don't fit in, that don't fit into this? Or do you recognize these kinds of hype? Have you ever seen these kinds of hype before?
I've definitely seen all three stages and this hype before, and I have seen it done well and I've seen it fail. And we were talking a minute ago about how being first to market isn't always best. It's usually second is usually best to market because they've learned from the first. If you could, as the first to market, really hone in on each of these areas, I think there's a better chance of being best to market.
Almost the exact quote from an analyst last month who said, forget about first to market, think about best to market. Sharpening out your positioning, sharpening out your wedge offering is just so much more important than creating an expectation that you then cannot deliver upon.
And knowing your targets and honing in on something, don't try to boil the ocean.
Yes.
You have to start small and really be focused in order to build, but have a plan to grow.
Yeah.
That doesn't sound like hype. That sounds like anti-hype. So that we're gonna get to Venice by putting one foot in front of the other continually for a long time until we get to Venice. That doesn't sound like hype.
But the difference is that road to Venice and getting to Venice is a long way away. So the picture that you're painting is a long way away, but you can paint the bigger picture, but when you're going to market with it, you're starting small. Like you claim, look, let's take Amazon as an example. Amazon does everything. When they started out, they sold books. And Jeff Bezos said, our vision is to do everything in the world, but today we sell books online. And that was it. So he painted that picture. And when he said, we're going to sell everything and be everywhere, like people are like, what are you talking about?
Yeah, right.
You're a bookstore, like fine, you're an online bookstore. But he focused on one thing to get that vision out there. As he got his vision out there and he said, we're going to grow, we're going to keep growing, but this is what we're doing it well. He did it so well, nobody could come in and take it away. And then he was able to expand. So he created hype.
That's a great point.
And if you think this comes back to this proof, to this proof that if you focus on one problem, one scenario, one use case, and clarify that in an exemplary way, then you are bringing forward a small slice of the future.
But you're showing the whole vision, but you're just focusing, because a lot of startups fail because they have the vision and they think they have to get everything done. And then these other, not even startups, like a lot of any company that has a big vision and it's going through a hype cycle, they try to boil the ocean, do too much, and then somebody will come behind them and just focus on one piece of it and do really well, and then grows into their vision.
I think sorry, you go ahead.
I just wanted to add quickly that, and that's especially a problem with startups, but it might as well be with innovation teams in large organizations who just don't have the capacity to do it all at the same time. It can be a technology, it can be use cases, it can be regions that they address, it can be industry clients that they address. So often they put all these industries on their website who they all service, but in reality they have 3 people, and and rather try to do it really well in one space and be known for that, and then expand from there is so much better. I believe we're so much at risk at confusing when we speak about hype. Is it something that happens, and we are part of it, and we need to navigate it? Or is it something that we create? And in like 99% of cases, because innovation pops up at different places around the world at roughly the same time, because the same technologies are available everywhere, and smart people are available everywhere, and the same technologies are available everywhere, and the same problems are everywhere. So the same types of innovation are coming up around the world at roughly the same time, and by default, I'm part of that thing. I need to navigate it, need to make it work for me. So me creating a hype, I'm just one drop in the ocean. It's so much more important for me to understand how that hype is evolving and where it is in the world, what character it has, in which phase it is, so that I can tune my activities to the phase in which the topic just is along the hype cycle.
Rory, I'm reminded of Malcolm X's line. We didn't land on Plymouth Rock. Plymouth Rock landed on us. So, like, does hype happen to industry analysts? Like, are industry analysts a victim of hype, or are they the agents of hype, or are they both?
Probably both. I think, if you're an experienced analyst and you've encountered many different companies, product, services, things that have been successful, things that haven't been successful, you start to recognize how hyperbole can be part of the process and can lead to hype. I think it's clear that some of this is cultural or a human condition. A bit of hype is seen as sort of okay in certain circumstances because it's kind of optimistic, it's future thinking. All of those things are associated with, being a leader, being a thought leader, that terrible phrase, being an entrepreneur. All those things are just seen as good. It's hopeful. It's hopeful. Whereas, actually, sometimes we're better off understanding what has happened in the past and how we got here. But yet, you don't see anybody saying, oh, that historian, such a thought leader, because it's not seen, looking back, is not seen as important as this sort of future thinking. So I think there's an element of that in everything that we do, that we're obsessed with the future, we're racing towards the future without placing the same value of understanding the past. However, arguably, the better we understand the past and how we got there, the better we'll be prepared for the future. And that's often overlooked. You think 100%. A lot of the things I like to write about, many clicks or subscribers or anything, but that's another matter, is, the perspective as an older man or person of how we got to where we are. Seeing the repeating cycles, seeing the things that happened then, they're not new, seeing where they were. It's kind of if you have a conversation with a Gen Xer or a millennium, millennial about music, and they'll talk about the incredible futuristic sounding music, and you're like, I've heard this somewhere before. Whether it's Oasis mimics the Beatles, or it's Dua Lipa mimicking whoever else, or God knows what Taylor Swift is mimicking. But it's a cultural thing. It's also a generational thing, and that kind of it engenders the acceptability of hype to a certain degree in everything that we do. And there's an expectation behind that.
I think that's a core role of the analyst, that it's not so much about there's this hype now, I need to decide whether I'm for it or against it, whether I celebrate it or not. That's not the point of the analyst. The analyst's role is to know that this hype has a certain characteristic, a certain curve that things always will follow. 30 years ago, 10 years ago, today, and in future. It is that characteristic of innovation and new topics and hype. So the value of the analyst is to just know at which point in the cycle to be thinking about which questions.
So imagine, like you have those polarizing filters on sunglasses, So is there, like there definitely are tools, habits and tools that analysts use to be able to remove the hype. But when I was an analyst at Colin, who had designed a macro that stripped out, there was a long list of hypey words, and you would run this macro and it would strip the hypey words out.
Yeah.
And then you would be left with, a much shorter part of the.
Our product does this.
Exactly, our product does this.
We could, a great tool today would be, okay, we've created Gen I tools. Can we not create anti-Gen AI tools? In other words, it reverses that process and strips it down to just facts. But then, of course, we get down to the role of the journalist and the reporter and the editor taking those simple building blocks. It's almost impossible to cut through it unless, I think, experience does help, because then you've maybe heard it before, or you've seen that practice before, or you've recognized that style, but it's getting increasingly harder.
I think, just to chip in, I also think just come back to hype a bit, and this thing about discontinuity. I think hype allows you to suggest discontinuity in markets. My background in the 1990s is in machine learning and genetic algorithms and like early artificial intelligences. And at the risk of overstating things, what we're doing, what is being done with machine learning today is essentially exactly the same as we were doing in the 1990s with machine learning. It's just that in the 1990s, you would have to set up a supercomputer to do it on a Friday evening and press the button. And when you came back on Monday morning, if you were lucky, the model would have built itself and given an answer. Now, you can do it on the fly in an instant, and that completely transforms the impact of it, even though the change in what these technologies are really doing is, it's mundane, right? So this is part of the reason why, even if there are extreme continuities in the technologies that are being deployed, a certain amount of hype is needed, because otherwise you don't understand the discontinuity in the impact. And I liked Jennifer's example of that successful organization that finds one use case to do something and does it and exemplarizes it. I see this very powerfully in lots of markets. And it reminds me of this line from William Gibson, that the future is already here, but it's unevenly distributed. Yeah. Mm-hmm. And what I see in the whole artificial intelligence area, there are lots of one third of Forrester's analysts are writing about Gen AI. But if you look at where AI is really making an impact, it's often in very simple machine learning scenarios, where you've got manual processes, bottlenecks, workflow problems, and you're able to automate that. You're able to get these bottle caps to the bottle factory just a little bit faster. But that doesn't sound like a huge market. And how do you position yourself as a leader when what you're talking about is really it could be a massive market change, but it's easy to make it sound like a mundane development.
Over time, exactly. People, the things that people look out for, and particularly investors, are kind of trying to look out for, are words like innovation, disruption, uniqueness, and it's kind of been coalesced over many years by that whole, move fast and break things idea, which is, if you were to say, well, actually, we're going to be moving slowly and fixing things, that doesn't seem to have the same appeal, certainly for the venture capitalists who are putting money in. And yet, that's how we've got to where we are now, by moving slowly and fixing things, relative to, the time that we've, started in the technology side of things.
But everything is speeding up now. It's tenfold, I'd say, since the pandemic. I mean, if you look at how we just actually did a survey on the pace of change at work and in life and technology, and 77% of respondents said that they feel since the pandemic that the pace of change is faster. The one thing that we've really honed in on is, people's skills. Jobs are changing on a daily basis. People don't have the same skills. So you're trying to create a product, or you're trying to create technology that's forward thinking. You think it's like a year out, it may be 6 months out. So now you know, when you're looking at investors, that's why they're really trying to buy stuff that's on the hype cycle way over here that hasn't even been developed or thought of yet. It's just a dot, because they know that everything's moving so fast.
Yeah.
Ian, can I try and throw a question to you? I mean, you do market research across a very wide range of organizations, and I know that you're working with some, like for example, one of the world's oldest golf clubs, say, you know, I know you're working with organizations that are in, I mean, like golf is, there's not that much discontinuity in golf, in my opinion, as far as I can see it. But many of these organizations are dealing with the desire and the need to transform and to address themselves to new markets. And also in the work that you are doing, supporting higher education institutions, non-profits, political parties, you know, very often when you want to get people's attention, and especially if you want to get people to change what they are doing, you have to give them a visualization of a different way of working. Now, when I think of Robert Cialdini's work at the University of Arizona, I mean, a lot of what he's doing is like pointing at comparable examples now. 76% of people who visit this hotel don't ask for housekeeping and reuse their towels the following day in order to save the planet. Most of our guests are good guests. We hope that you will be a good guest. So very often that is like pointing at the exemplary behavior that you want to say. The seeds of the change that we want are already here. What do you see, like hype? Do you see hype tactics being contemplated, or when organized, or do you see, I mean, does this look familiar to you when organizations are dealing with change? Do you see other kinds of change, of motivational picture painting for change?
Let me refer back.
It's like 17 questions. I'm sorry, it's very unfair.
It very much depends where you're going to go. So I do quite a lot of work in the British political sphere with particular parties or a particular party. And they desperately need to change which of those kind of most relates to them, I'm wondering. They need to change people's minds quite desperately. They need to change the impression that folk have of them. And in doing that, yeah, for them, they really want to motivate the future state. That's what they're trying to do. You know, and if they could, you know, I advise them a lot for not using that language, using language that's used in that particular paradigm, which is the paradigm of politics. They really want to do that. You know, so what they want to talk about is the impact of changing your behavior and how your behavior can change the greater good as they see it. And if they can make that happen, then they can achieve that. But they have an enormous barrier to it. They have to create a vision that doesn't exist.
Yeah.
You know, and so they're doing that. You know, and interestingly, they haven't talked about the uniqueness of other people who have done that. They don't go that direction at all.
Yeah.
Or sometimes locating the opportunity, but for them it's motivating that future state, which is kind of everything. They dip into behavior economics and other things to try and use the tactics to do that. And some of the work they've done has been effective enough, it just falls absolutely flat because it's incredibly static market politics, despite being very volatile at this moment. It has been incredibly static for a very long time. So any new actor trying to break into any new party has to do something radical to upset disrupt the system. And Farage is seen as a great disruptor at the minute. He is.
Yeah.
Whatever what we make of him. That's not who I work with, but this another organisation have to do the same thing. And so they've been trying to create the disruption, but not able to. So they're really focused on one. Perhaps they should have done something different. And maybe Farage is doing something different, and his party are doing something, which is.
It's interesting that I mean, okay, that's probably not a productive direction to take things, but you know, I'm not sure that Farage does any of these things. I mean, I think it's motivating a past state, isn't it? It's saying, well, the Britain we want is it's something like 1972.
Look, I work with, they're saying we got to fall, we can't go back. The bank didn't work.
I feel we're talking about communication tactics. And that's not what I thought a discussion about hype cycle and so would be.
But this is about hype, not just about the hype cycle. It's about hype as a phenomenon.
Okay.
When you're hyping up the startups that you're working with, you know, I'm sure they will talk about themselves and their clients and the customer changes.
Yeah, but that's marketing. That's not analyst relations. That's marketing. That's communications.
But I mean, the story that you use to the outside market might be the same opportunity. It might be the same. These narratives are narratives that these companies are using with their customers, with investors, and with thought leaders.
Yeah, sure. Well, I think the world is so much bigger than we are. So I think the fact that there is hype and we need to deal with it and navigate with our ship to get through this hype and use it or influence it or whatever, that problem is just so much bigger than should I, and if so, how can I best stir up the thing from my little boat as well?
I think so much of it is, and if somebody said story, but yeah, storytelling. You know, storytelling and hype are very closely linked, because storytelling as a kind of an ancient practice and way of articulating something in simple terms that, you know, even young kids can understand, is a communications technique which is very effective. You know, I think Farage is quite good at doing that. When he has an idea, he then articulates it in a certain way, like a story. And to these points, hype plays a part in that. If you tell a story well, irrespective of what it is, it's more believable and more credible. So if you think about all the fairy stories that we were told as kids, you know, you think back and as an analyst, you'd go, well, that's physically impossible. You know, no, there couldn't possibly be asleep for 100 years and be alive. But the way it's told in the context of the ideas and the imagination and the sort of, you know, good versus evil and the hero wins is believable. And, you know, that is a form of hype in a way. But within a context that makes it believable. I think part of it in the modern day comes down to people understanding whether or accepting whether they're right or wrong. It's become increasingly difficult to persuade people that they were wrong about something. It's more difficult for people to accept that, partly because of the way that opinions are formed, what we were talking about earlier. The phrase, you know, don't believe the hype. People often believe the hype because they buy into the emotion that brings to them, and the belief that it could happen, that this is part of who they are. It's an emotional connection to whatever part of the story and the vision is being given. That's certainly something that, you know, is very prevalent in tech and is accelerating potentially. You see that.
Absolutely.
So the word emotion is really interesting there, isn't it? Because
hero is actually a really good one too, because that's something we do. Is we make
say that again.
Hero is a big one because you make the buyer the hero of the story, not the product, the buyer. How are you going to take your company into the future? How are you going to be the one to save the day when everything's falling around beside you? And so that's kind of where hype and showing a vision comes in to play.
Yeah, you want to be the hero, you know, the hero's journey. It's that fundamental basic story architecture that you want to be part of.
Yeah.
And who are the hypers? You know, like, I mean, I get the feeling that Chris's customers are often talking a little bit materially about the benefit that they're able to produce. They need to work a little bit harder, maybe to prove their own value proposition rather than painting a picture of somewhere over the rainbow. Is there a particular, when you, I mean, like you've got so much experience, you must have been pitched to so many times by vendors. Is hype evenly distributed, or is it concentrated in particular countries, firms of a particular size?
There's definitely individuals and personalities who can carry that message really well because they're charismatic, they're persuasive, they have a really good way of communicating and convincing you, but also being very happy to answer questions and to kind of counter any objections. That's the kind of perfect state. I've met plenty of people who are kind of off that scale, who are just obviously crazy, to use a not very PC term, but who are sort of fundamentalist. They don't necessarily carry that hype. Now, the other end of the scale are those who don't really understand or don't really believe in what they're talking about, and I've met many of them because to them it's just another set of features and functions that go on ad infinitum. Because why? Well, it's important to have the detail. It's important to tell about this product and this feature.
It's the magic red button.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And in the middle there, it's that perfect set. So I think it's certain individuals, it's certain groups of people. There are back to the influencers. There are influencers and strategists within companies who are the spads of the tech world, if you like, who have the kind of insights into people's motivations and buyers' motivations that others don't have.
Just for our American listener, a SPAD is a British kind of spin doctor.
Yeah,
thank you.
Sorry, and often they're the ones that will help the the industry or technology leaders make those key decisions. They will be using data. They will be. I mean, I hate to mention it, but if you look at somebody like Dominic Cummings, he made sure that he was surrounded by data and surveys and groups that were testing messaging and so on to be very confident about that. It's that kind of special blend, and I've met many of them, many of whom you would think, oh, that's fantastic, and maybe nothing happens, but it's not to denigrate their contribution. But those are the qualities.
I mean, I just think it's interesting to note like the shadow of this notion of the evangelist. Yeah, that on the one hand you have some tech firms who are very much. I mean, maybe there isn't a tension between these two things. You have this idea of like the workman-like crafting of solutions today to help clients today, where you can very much base yourself in current proof, and then on the other hand, this vision of the golden unlit of the uplit of the sunny uplit future with the rainbows, and maybe there are people who are doing both, but these are perhaps both kinds of hype. Hyping up small examples of success which may not be representative of what's happening in the market, and glorious visions of the future which also might not be realistic.
I think there's hype enablers who could be very effective. So, for example, typically as an analyst, go to an event, conference, whatever, the most senior person is giving the keynote. And that's usually some kind of visionary thing. Now, some are very good at it, some not so good at it, but that's the kind of tip of the iceberg. And then you have these groups on the tech side are becoming more and more significant. Let's say the developer and evangelist or developer advocate, they're working with the people that are effectively adopting and creating and recreating products, who are taking that code and developing it, who are becoming, taking partnerships and leveraging to create new apps, and effectively are providing a vision to them, but on a very practical Q&A type basis. They're creating substantial justification for what they're doing in practical ways. Whereas the CEO or whoever is at the top is giving the kind of broad vision for the investment community, for the press, for that side. So there's kind of layers.
I would also say, let me just add to that you asked, who's spreading hype, and I think the world has changed a lot. So it used to be you had your analysts, you had your marketing people, you had your channels that you went to. Now there's so many channels and so many opinions and people giving their opinions that hype, someone can just say something or do something, and then all of a sudden it becomes a phenomenon. Let's take ChatGPT as an example. 2 years ago, like, people hadn't really heard about it. About a year or however long ago, they went to several influencers and said, try this product. Those influencers came out and said, oh my gosh, look what I did. And overnight, it became the next hype cycle. Mm-hmm. So it's really, there's a lot of people, different avenues to hype, I think, these days that didn't exist before.
It's also about timing, the timing of the hype. I know this may sound a bit bonkers, but ChatGPT, to your point, was version 3 when it came out. Nobody had heard of it until May 2023. Is that right? No, May 2022.
I think it was 22.
22. It was announced the same month as the CDC and other health agencies worldwide officially said that the COVID pandemic was over. I thought that was an interesting analogy. Suddenly we had what was in people's minds was the pandemic.
There was room for something new.
And now suddenly here we are.
Second pandemic.
Well, what have you also looked into the risks of hype as a concept of, conjuring up inflated expectations, sell now, apologize later, like this?
Yeah, I mean, there is this whole area. I mean, we need to wrap up and move to our break, but I mean, there are these liabilities which are long-term liabilities, of using hype, and the challenge is that so often startup ventures are not really expected to survive. They're expected to have short and beautiful lives like butterflies, and then be harvested by tech firms. So, like, they are never really held accountable for their ability to actualize the vision. Yeah? They are just there to survive long enough to be bought and exit the market. On that happy note, we're going to wrap up for our 15-minute break. I hope there are no questions, no unanswered questions in the chat. So we're going to break, and then we will have our final panel. Thank you very much.